Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for another episode of Inside the Markets. And today we are covering the cryptos with my good friend, Robert Allen of COINCUBE, also a former broker with Peter Schiff's Precious Metals Company. So we may dig into metals too. A lot of good stuff. So hit that subscribe button now so that you can stay tuned with the good stuff we're bringing you here. And with that said, Robert, welcome to the show. And how are you today, my friend?
I'm excellent, Chris. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. We met, I think it was back in 2011 when you were still with Peter Schiff. I bought some silver from you back then.
Yep.
And it was interesting. I think you were the first person who told me about Bitcoin way back when. Obviously now you've created COINCUBE, so certainly a crypto expert, and with everything that's going on in the crypto sector these days, who better to talk to? So perhaps we could start off, just give us a recap of where you think the whole crypto market stands. Obviously getting beaten up pretty thoroughly lately, so I'd love to hear what you're thinking and seeing right now.
Yeah, well, experience is one of life's best allies, I guess you could say. I have been, in crypto now for quite a while. I think I heard about Bitcoin in 2011. I went up to the Porcupine Freedom Festival, Libertarian Festival up in New Hampshire. And there were all these wild libertarians with this weird digital money. And unfortunately, I didn't actually understand it at that point, and I didn't take the time to learn about it. And I didn't understand that they had basically solved this problem of digital scarcity. The idea that, typically with digital things like an MP3 or a Word document, you can just copy that as many times as you want, right? And of course, money needs to be scarce for it to have value and to be useful. So I just kind of dismissed it out of hand and thought, this is some crazy experiment that could never work. But then I started following it a little bit more, 2012, 13, and really finally got involved in 2013. And so, I've been, but I've lived through now, one significant bubble where I actually had, skin in the game and sat through the 2014 and 15 down cycle.
Good training, right?
Yeah, and I will be honest, there were days when I thought, maybe I've really made a big blunder here, and this whole thing is just going to blow up in my face. But I think overall, the conviction in the technology and what I was seeing, and ultimately, if you just look at one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin and crypto is it's an information-rich market. So for Bitcoin, you can go to blockchain.info, for example, and you can look at all sorts of charts that show you the number of transactions per day on the network, the hash rate, which is basically the number of computations that are being used to essentially secure the network. Mm-hmm. So all that sort of information really can give you a sense of the health of the network. And I kept seeing, in spite of the price of Bitcoin dropping so much, that the usage on the network was continuing to rise. The number of wallets was going up. So you just start to draw some trend lines, and assuming that those trends continue, you can start to extrapolate out, in 2 or 3 years, you're going to have, right now we have 1 million users and we'll probably have 10 million. And that was in fact the case. So following trends has really been my friend in terms of investing in crypto. But in general, it's obviously a very, very volatile market. It's a very small market compared to most others. And, I think the analogy of kind of imagining, if you've got a little pool and you jump into it, you're going to make a big splash. If you jump into the ocean, you're not going to see really any splash at all. And that really is the case for crypto. So, the prices move up and down quite a bit because of the smaller size of the market. Mm-hmm. And I also think part of it too is that you have some people who just get in because they see the price rising and there's that speculation thing. And crypto is pretty easy to speculate in compared to like a stock portfolio. It can be a little bit trickier sometimes to set that up. And there's a lot of potentially KYC, AML, and paperwork and just nonsense. Whereas with crypto, if you open up a Coinbase account or other providers like that, you can buy crypto the same day, and you can send it to Binance or some exchange and start buying up a bunch of altcoins. And so it's easy to get into. And I think that also the ease of liquidity in and out of it lends to more volatility in the market. But yeah, I mean, I think, again, I've always been more of a fundamentals kind of investor. And the market fundamentals for crypto are good, and they continue to look good in terms of the number of wallets, the number of users, the number of use cases. For example, in Venezuela right now and in Argentina, countries where you have significant problems with inflation, Bitcoin is becoming more and more used. And in terms of the trading volumes there and the number of people holding crypto, the numbers continue to rise. So there are real world use cases. I also think another big case for Bitcoin especially is going to be essentially, offshore banking, where you can really have a Swiss bank account essentially in terms of how Bitcoin works, where you're able to mitigate political risk and risks like that, and to really hold your money in a way that it can't be confiscated by governments or banks. And I think even more than that, coming from the precious metals world, I think that Bitcoin really represents what gold is supposed to be, but even I would argue actually, augments or adds additional features, such as the portability, the fact that you can travel across borders with millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency. And if you know a 12-word seed phrase, no one can take that from you, and no one would even know that you have that money.
Right.
So that's a tremendous power that, with gold, you're obviously dealing with a physical commodity that you have to transport if you're going to move it across a border. So that's a big downside for gold. So I think Bitcoin really, is kind of a furtherance of that vision of a non-government money. And in many ways, at the very least, I would say is a very, very good complement to gold. For those of your, watchers, listeners who are gold bugs, I understand all those arguments, and I would say I, agree with most of them. So that's one thing I think that's interesting, is that you've kind of got this bifurcation where you have more or less kind of libertarian free market types, but then you've got one camp who's the gold bug camp, you've got one camp who's the crypto camp, and I think to the degree that we can try to work together and move together, we should. So there's actually one interesting project called Vault Oro, and they are essentially allowing people to buy gold with Bitcoin and trade back and forth. They've created a market for gold to Bitcoin, and I still haven't done it, but it's on I would say my 6 month to a year kind of roadmap. But eventually, I'd like to actually integrate Vault Oro, so CoinCube users would be able to hold some gold and actually, kind of mix that into their portfolio, and kind of see it in conjunction with their crypto. So essentially, it'd be kind of like more of a hard money portfolio at that point. It wouldn't be purely crypto. Right. But I see some benefits there in, of course, gold is going to be quite a bit more stable than Bitcoin. So, let's say you are trying to trade a little bit more in terms of speculating on the price movements. You could, instead of holding dollars, you could sell your Bitcoin for gold if you feel like the price of Bitcoin has gotten a little bit ahead of itself, right. Which is kind of cool. And then you're never even touching fiat. So there's some really cool things happening in crypto that, again, fundamentals look really solid. And that's what I pay attention to. Lived through this before. It's, it'll happen again. And if you look at charts for Bitcoin, there have been, I think we're up to 5 or 6 bubbles now. But generally speaking, it'll hit some new high and then it'll crash. But the price that it drops to during that crash is typically twice as high as the last high, as the last bubble high. And that's what we're at now, because I think Bitcoin topped in 2013, I think it was. It topped at I think it was like $1,300 or $1,500, or maybe it even got to 2019, 18. I forget the exact number, but it was in that range, and right now it's sitting at 34, 3,500. So it's roughly double the last peak prior to this big $20,000 run up. So the fundamentals are looking good. Yeah, I mean, now's the time. If you've been sitting on the fence about crypto, this is when you want to buy. You don't want to buy when it's always it's all over the news, everyone's freaking out, and the price is at near an all-time high. That's the wrong time to buy. But this is a great time. So yeah, that's, I guess, a little bit of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and Robert, you make a lot of good points in there, especially when you talk about the fundamentals, because like in a lot of our markets, sometimes the fundamentals are divorced from the trading action. Someone was mentioning recently how the price is often a voting machine.
Sure.
And essentially, if we're talking about a technology that probably less than 1% actually of the population actually understands, it makes sense that, all right, if you're going to see a bigger price appreciation, it may take more adoption or implementation until that happens. So that's why I like what you mentioned about looking at how many wallets are being opened up. Is the technology actually being adopted? I mean, we've seen in the past year it went from 1,000 to 20,000 back to 3,000. So someone's right in the long term, someone isn't.
Right.
But if the technology has to be used, which, and again, what drew me into it, and based on our conversations from years back where, both seeing that any argument you can make against the cryptos applies more thoroughly to the dollar. And people are saying it's a digital asset. What's here? I mean, look at all these digital dollars the Fed is creating.
Right.
So I've kind of looked at it as long as the adoption, and you see, plus I don't think we've hit the real break point, which whenever the dollar really runs into trouble, I'm curious what happens then with the price when we're forced to use it, similar to how you mentioned is happening down in some of the countries that are already experiencing that.
Yeah, right. You bring up a very good point, which is that Bitcoin in many ways, similar to gold, is essentially a play that is short the dollar, short stability in U.S. economy and other economies, basically short the system as it stands today, which we see just tremendous debt that continues to pile up in the United States that, is going to have to be reconciled at some point. And most likely the easiest route politically is to print money. It's the least painful probably of all the routes that they could take, at least in the immediate term. And that's politicians are thinking about the next election. They're not thinking about 5 or 10 years from now. So yeah, that's really, I think, the most succinct argument for Bitcoin is to say that, if you don't believe the system can be sustained as it is today, then what are your alternatives? Where can you store some value and hope to weather that storm? Gold and silver make a lot of sense in that argument. Potentially some stocks can, I would argue. And then, of course, I think crypto really is a great play there as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you get past all of the doctrine and the things people are saying about no tangible value, but actually compare. Again, last year I had an assistant help me with some things, and I had to pay about $100 or $200. And I'm like, geez, if I wanted to get a check, I either have to go to the bank or go to the ATM, then have to go find the person versus, if you just send some Litecoin or send some Bitcoin.
Right.
Similar with, I had money wired a couple months ago. It actually took a few hours to show up. I'm sure it was about $40 versus you could have sent that instantly for pennies. And you also mentioned how if, let's say, you want to go to another country, I would disagree with the laws we have in place. I mean, if you have $50,000 and want to get on a plane with it, I don't see why some bureaucrat has any influence, whereas with the cryptos, you can actually do that. So it seems to me like is a much better system, and I get the feeling you're agreeing with that as well.
Yeah, that's another good point is if you just think about, gold, dollar, Bitcoin, all these different forms of money as, essentially all competing, which they are to some degree, then what are the features? What are the pros and cons for each of these options? And start to just kind of weigh those out and then think long term, what are people ultimately going to prefer? And to me, that seems very obvious, really from the point I read the white paper, that at least, there would be subsets of people who would find use with crypto, be it people in countries with problems with inflation, be it people, essentially operating in gray or black markets, and all of those use cases have proven themselves so far. And I think also kind of to the other point you were making earlier, I remind me of Peter, this idea of, intrinsic value. And, ironically, I love Peter. Obviously, I worked for him for several years. I think he's, a brilliant economist in many respects. And overall, I think his take on, the Federal Reserve and the government in terms of how things are operating, he's spot on. But
Right.
one place where I would say I differ is, this idea that money needs to have a quote intrinsic value for it to have value. And ironically, I believe it's Murray Rothbard actually, argued that all value is subjective. That you need a human with wants and desires to actually look at that object and decide that they want it for it to be valuable. So in other words, obviously, if the earth was devoid of human life or of sentient thinking beings, then nothing would have value, right? It would all just be inert or lifeless or whatever. Right. And so, yeah, I that's how I view it. I think that value is subjective. It's based on human psychology and on our wants and needs, and whether a given tool can help us to achieve our goals. And so that's where I really do feel like, in many respects, Bitcoin and crypto provide a better use case as money than gold or dollars. Of course, there are some examples. If there was a giant solar flare and we lost all of our communications and so on, then Bitcoin would be in trouble. That would be hard to use.
Right.
So gold would win in that scenario. But given if the idea is that we are going to live in a world that is increasingly connected, digital, internet based, then you need a money that is internet, that is native to the internet, that is programmable, and that is non-government and borderless. And so that's really the big vision, I think, for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned what Rothbard said. It's funny, when I was back in Libertopia earlier this year, I was listening to Jeffrey Tucker speak, and he was mentioning the definitions of money, and I like how you mentioned how if there's anyone who's anti-crypto, maybe the gold bugs, but the silver bugs in particular.
Okay.
And on one hand, I get it, yet there's what perhaps I think should be money, and then, you can go down Venezuela or Argentina and look where the currency is actually failing what they're using. So I think there's some value to the empirical. Right. And then again, as we talked about earlier, okay, where's the intrinsic value behind digital dollars or the Federal Reserve's printing press? Right. So, I find just thinking in those terms helps put things in perspective a little bit. One question I was curious to ask you, are there any names in particular, cryptos that you like? Again, won't ask you to give, we're not giving licensed financial information, but certainly any ones that, for people who are looking to buy that in your opinion are at least worth investigating or have good business ideas that you're interested in.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to say a few things. Again, obviously not investment advice, so do your own research. Of course, Bitcoin has been a big part of my portfolio from the beginning of my interest for a few reasons. Obviously, first mover advantage is important, especially when you're looking at a technology that is predicated on network effect. So in other words, it may not be the best, quote unquote, best technology that wins. It may just be the one that has the widest adoption. And so there are some arguments that Bitcoin may not be the best crypto. And there's, people will try to say that the confirmation time is a problem. I think that's a bit of a red herring because for most transactions, you could actually basically trust it even before you have any confirmations in the blockchain that, the transaction is going to go through. But we're kind of getting into the woods or the weeds here with some of that. So I don't know how far we want to go there. But yeah, so Bitcoin, of course, there's some detractors and some things about it that could be argued. But it has, of course, the largest number of users, the most recognition in terms of just name recognition. And if you're going to trade on any exchange, they will have a Bitcoin to X pair to trade. So it's really the ubiquitous asset in the market right now. And I don't see that going away anytime soon. So I really would say, it's easy to get, kind of sucked in to this idea that, well, there's this new technology and it's better, and they'll have their reasons for why it's the new best thing. And the get rich quick, thing that you should buy. I would be cautious about that. There have been quite a few outright scams. And then there are also just a lot of kind of half-baked projects. So, a core holding, I would argue, for just about anyone in crypto should be Bitcoin. Beyond that, I really am very excited about Ethereum. There are some questions about scalability there. It remains to be seen. I would say it's a bit more speculative than Bitcoin. But in terms of adoption, it is really the smart contract blockchain right now. You have ERC20 tokens, which are very popular, and it's a standard that's used for countless projects. So basically, the ICO boom was an ERC20 boom, more or less. And for those who don't know, that's basically ERC20 is a contract on Ethereum that allows you to create essentially a digital token of value, and that can be really to whatever specification is required by that project. So there are quite a few ERC20 tokens that are, a couple examples would be REP, for example, which is the Augur token. That was one of the first ones, and there are many others. But so Ethereum is very exciting. The other thing that's interesting about it is you also have ERC721 tokens, which basically are non-fungible digital items. And those are mostly being used, for example, if you've heard of CryptoKitties, that was probably the most kind of popular and maybe one of the first to build on this idea. But they're essentially collectible crypto, cards, if you will, or items, similar to almost like Beanie Babies or something like that. So it's, each one is unique. And but for people who like collecting and trading cards, this is really essentially taking that idea but applying it to a blockchain. And there are a lot of other projects that are coming out. There's one recently that I think it's Gods. My memory on that's lacking, but basically it's like they're taking a collectible card game or trading card game and building that into using the Ethereum network to build that. So there's some really cool things happening there. Basically, a lot of users, a lot of developer adoption, which is very important if you're going to try to build a protocol and actually have it used in software. You really need to get developers on board. So there's a lot of support there. There's really good developer tools. So I think Ethereum should be a core holding as well. And then beyond that, it's hard to say. There are a lot of projects I like. There's some argument for privacy coins like Dash or Monero.
Okay.
I
actually did talk with Joel from the Dash team. It was interesting. He mentioned in Venezuela, a lot of people are using Dash right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like, Dash gets some hate because of this sort of pre-mine issue that is kind of out there. And I'm not totally sure what I think about that. But I do like what I've seen from them in terms of, just trying to think creatively about how to build a cryptocurrency and also how to incentivize developers. So basically built into their model, they actually have part of the mining fee is directed to a fund that they are able to then use to pay developers, to pay marketers. And so that way it kind of operates a little bit more closely to a decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, or a DAO, as some people will call those. So that's a really cool feature. Actually, that's one thing that I kind of wish that Bitcoin rather would build into its protocol is some kind of way to actually help fund the development of that software. So Dash is interesting. Monero is interesting. Monero uses technology called ring signatures, which is probably quite a bit more secure, I would argue, in terms of privacy than Dash from what I've understood. There's potentially ways that you could de-anonymize people in Dash. I mean, theoretically, a bit more easily. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably all I would say. There's so many projects. It's really hard to kind of cherry pick. One thing that I do believe in is essentially, for people to take a subset of their investment in crypto and just buy an index, especially if you don't have the time and or ability really to dig deeply into all these white papers and to understand what's going on. Maybe take, if you're going to, invest, let's say 10,000 in crypto, maybe take 2,000-3,000 of that and just buy an index of crypto. So say the top 10 or the top 20. And really what that allows you to do is to follow the market in a more broad sense and to have a little bit of exposure to quite a few different projects. Again, a handful of those are probably going to go nowhere, given kind of the size and where we are in terms of the growth of these networks. Some of them will die, but as long as a couple of those do well, which is pretty likely, then that should work out pretty well in the end. And so that's one of the things that we've built into COINCUBE, which is a portfolio index portfolio approach. You can also do your own custom portfolio with our software. But we make it really easy for people to follow an index, to have it rebalance, monthly or daily. Even we've got a lot of different features that people can play with to really customize and get exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to dig in a little bit more to the COINCUBE, and perhaps for the folks that obviously there's a lot of people out there trading the cryptos. And maybe you could just give an overview of some of the services and ways that can help make that easier. And I think especially now would be a good time for people to be aware of what you're doing, especially if they are looking to get invested.
Sure. Yeah, so the vision for COINCUBE has definitely evolved a little bit over the last few years as I've been working on the project. Where we are headed is, essentially we want to first of all, make it very easy for people to monitor their entire crypto portfolio. So, before you even start thinking about trading, you need to really have a good idea of what you're holding. And ideally, you should not be holding, all of your crypto on an exchange. That's very dangerous, especially just on one exchange. It's a very dangerous thing to do. Mm-hmm. There have been some pretty notable, exchange hacks where people have lost a lot of money. So the first thing that we offer, we have a couple different products, or I guess I call them modes now. But basically with COINCUBE, you can, for free, track your portfolio. That's one of the modes. So you can add wallet addresses, so you can actually track the assets on those wallets. If funds come in, that'll be accounted for with the software. If funds go out, et cetera. So that should make life a little bit easier. If you've got funds on multiple different wallets, you can track those. We have wallet support for most of the big, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, et cetera. Most of the big coins we have support for. And then secondly, you can track your holdings on exchanges. We have 11 exchanges now that we support. So, most likely we have you covered, and we're adding exchanges pretty frequently. So that number continues to grow. So that's the first thing. And then beyond that, if you are looking to actually automate an index, you can do that. We have an index product. So you can hold funds on an exchange like Binance or Poloniex or whatever, and very easily, allocate to the top 10 or top 20. And that will rebalance every month, and it will also re-index. So for example, if, the number 10 asset falls out of that index, it'll sell that out and buy whatever is now in that place, number 10. And then the third product we're offering is called Centaur, and that's essentially a portfolio management tool that you can use to build a custom portfolio. You could also use it even to more or less day trade. So you can basically fully customize your portfolio allocations on an exchange. So let's say, from week to week, you want to make kind of more precise decisions about, I'm holding this asset and now I'm going to sell it. You can do that very easily with COINCUBE. You can also set it to rebalance with sort of an index approach as well, but you could build a custom index. So that product is really kind of geared toward more active portfolio management type strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, it hasn't been released yet, but I would expect within the next month, roughly, we will be launching a dollar cost or a cost average tool. I guess it's not purely dollar cost because you'll be able to average with Bitcoin as well. But that tool will allow you to say every week, buy X amount of Ethereum, or I should say buy X value worth of Bitcoin of Ethereum. So let's say it's 0.01 Bitcoin. And what that does is, if the price of Ethereum has dropped compared to Bitcoin, it'll buy a little bit more because you're averaging in with the same amount of Bitcoin or the same amount of dollars. It's a very kind of popular approach for stock investing, and especially when you're trying to get in and out of positions,
Mm-hmm.
You'll be able to use that tool. So I'm really excited. I think that's going to be very useful. And given where we are in the market right now with crypto, for people who maybe been on the fence, now is a great time to average into a portfolio because the prices, they could drop more, of course. That's possible. But when we're sitting at a, more than 80% drop in Bitcoin, it's the odds that it goes to 90% from the top are, lower than that it goes up from here. Right. So that's kind of where we are. And so I'm excited about that tool, and I think it should be very useful. But yeah, I mean, the vision is to be able to monitor and to automate a crypto portfolio from one place, kind of your crypto dashboard. And that's what we're doing. And it's exciting to see people using the product we worked for the last year, basically rebuilding the entire application. I was in Switzerland about a year ago, and we got into an accelerator program, which was really exciting. And basically, we made some mistakes in the infrastructure side of things, and we were not able to scale up. We had a massive amount of interest in new users onboarding on the platform, but the trade engine was essentially built poorly, and it was more or less like, if you can imagine, a one-lane highway or one-lane road. And so as you get more and more users, you just start to have a bottleneck. So the new version has been rebuilt to essentially be parallelized. And so now as we scale up, I can add additional lanes when they're needed. And so, that's one of those things where, coming from finance and not a software background, I've run into some issues where I just simply didn't have the information to make good decisions. But 4.5 years in now to software development, I think I've finally learned some of those harder lessons about scaling and some of those things. And I'm really excited about the software that we've built, and it's working very well now. So I'm excited to see more and more people use it.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that's how life sorts these things out sometimes, where we have to tinker for a while, and then at the right time, things come into place. And certainly with the environment now, I think you're in a great position. Especially, I do believe we'll see another wave and a lot of interest.
Yeah.
It was interesting. One of the guests I had on, actually in Liechtenstein, runs a fund that invests in crypto. So a few folks perhaps I could introduce you to that might be a good fit for what you're doing, as well as just regular people who are getting into cryptos. And we have all this infrastructure for stocks and bonds.
Yeah.
And it's nice that you're providing that for the crypto sector, which I think, especially as the market grows again, I think will be some exciting times.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, there are a lot of tools and kind of infrastructure that really need to be built for crypto for people to be able to use it.
Yep.
And that's, what I'm trying to do is find a need in the market and hopefully address it. And in terms of, the comment about your connection in Liechtenstein, so it's not launched yet, but I do have plans and have been working on essentially like an institutional version of COINCUBE, which would be focused toward, funds, fund managers, investment advisors, that sort of family offices, people who are managing lots of money and might have, funds on multiple exchanges. And so, we don't have to go too far into that because it's still in the works, but that's something I'm excited about because I think, right now we're kind of B2C for consumers, but what we've built definitely can translate pretty nicely, I think, to kind of a B2B model. And so that's definitely in the works. So yeah, we'll have to talk more about that.
Yeah, well, Robert, it's been great following the progression of CoinCube over the years, learning about cryptos from you over the years, and also just enjoying our friendship.
Yeah,
So,
appreciate it.
I'm really excited to have you on here today. And perhaps just in wrapping up, you can let folks know where they can find you. I think you're offering a lot of things people would be well served to at least inquire about and get more information. So how do they find you?
Yeah, sure. So CoinCube is coincube.io. That's coin and then cube, like the geometric shape, coincube.io. We're obviously on Twitter and Facebook. My personal Twitter is BTC1982. It's not the year I was born. Kidding. Yeah, so you can follow me on there. I'm not super active on Twitter. I'm more of a, I like to read more than I like to post on there, to be completely honest. But yeah, but I am on there. I've been really heads down programming for the last year, so my social life has suffered a little bit. But yeah, it's good to be back, kind of up for air and chatting with you and reconnecting. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to have you on. You shared a lot of great information today, especially when people are seeing the prices get pounded. You mentioned the blood in the streets and really understanding what you're doing and knowing when those opportunities are there.
Yeah.
Gives a lot for folks to think about. So thanks again. And we'll put that information below so people can click on it. And we'll look forward to checking back in again with you soon.
Thanks, Chris. It was a pleasure.